Greetings and welcome to another impressions video here at Words About Games, and today we're going to be looking at Streets of Rage 4. Streets of Rage 4 is the latest entry in the venerable franchise, coming 25 years after its predecessor. Axel, Adam, Blaze and more are back, looking to clean up the crime-ridden streets of Woodhawk City, which has been overrun by all sorts of different criminals that need a solid beatdown. I went into Streets of Rage 4 with a very peculiar mindset. While I was a Sega girl growing up, and I did play the Streets of Rage games with my friends, I was never really into 2D side-scrolling beat-em-ups. I was the nerd that played JRPGs, or platformers, or strategy games, over fighting games for the most part. And Sonic. Every Sega kid played Sonic. So when I got Streets of Rage 4, I was more interested in playing with my friend. The game was just the backdrop for the social interaction with someone I hadn't seen since the lockdown started 65 months ago. And while I had a great time catching up with my friend, I also really enjoyed the game itself. The trio of developers who took on the task of recreating and updating a series whose last release was 25 years ago have done a really good job of making Streets of Rage feel fresh and modern. Where I was expecting a game that would feel old, clunky, and beholden to the past, as a lot of retro revivals do, Streets of Rage 4 feels quite new. Don't get me wrong, this is a game that has a deep respect of what came before. Streets of Rage 4 plays pretty similarly to its predecessors. You still beat up a series of bad guys that are as plentiful as they are absurd. You can still smash a trash can to find a whole chicken, and you can still accidentally roundhouse kick your buddy in the face if you get too carried away with a combo. But the combat here feels slick and responsive. The core of the game should be pretty familiar to anyone who's played Streets of Rage, or any other 2D brawler. The trio of developers responsible for this comeback have wisely avoided overcomplicating the core formula that made Streets of Rage a beloved classic in its heyday. Each of the selectable cast of characters has their own distinct playstyle, and after some short experimentation, you'll doubtless find a favourite, whether it's Cherry and her ability to jump on enemies, or the heavy-hitting Adam. Characters have light attack combos, heavy attack combos, a jump, and a special attack, which comes in two varieties and sacrifices a portion of your health, which you can get back if you follow up with more attacks. You can also pull off multiple different types of standard attacks, depending on which way you're pointing the analog stick when you push the attack button, making combos feel more fluid than just mashing light and heavy attacks together. Each hero also has a super attack, powered by stars you can find hidden throughout the levels that can do big damage to multiple opponents. You can also pick up discarded enemy weapons to help you turn the tide on your opponents, or use them to accidentally bash your friend's head in. The fantastic animations at work in Streets of Rage 4 make the beat-em-up action feel incredibly satisfying to play, with your movements and attacks flowing together delightfully to create a brilliant spectacle on the screen. The only thing that can feel a bit weird at first, and bear with me here, is the lack of a dedicated dodge. I've grown accustomed to having the ability to dodge in side-scrolling games for a while now, so not being able to acrobatically leap away from danger was, at first, an annoyance. It speaks to how respectful Streets of Rage 4 is to its past. You couldn't dodge back then, and you can't dodge now. But Streets of Rage 4 has its own particular flaw. While button mashing can be a perfectly acceptable strategy, the deeper into the game I progressed, the more I began to respect how the game wanted me to play. Slick combat actually requires you to be meticulous and precise, both in how well you time your strikes and how you maneuver yourself around its battlefields. Once I started to pay closer attention to what I was doing and the way my characters moved and fought, I gained a deeper appreciation of the game as a whole. The huge variation in its different stages help with this as well. There are 12 stages in Streets of Rage 4, of which I've seen 10. Each level is incredibly distinct from the last, both in terms of presentation, thanks to the stunningly beautiful art style and the on-point soundtrack, and gameplay mechanics. There are some fundamental differences between how each of the levels behave and what obstacles you'll face. You'll find yourself in places like the sewers, where you need to avoid toxic puddles that drain your health and slow you down, or in my personal favourite section, a glass elevator, whose sides can be broken by multiple attacks and then used to throw enemies out of the level entirely. There are a lot of different enemy types coming at you throughout the game's various stages to keep you on your toes, requiring you to keep adapting your strategies on the fly to be successful. It's not mega in-depth or convoluted, but it does keep combat feeling continuously fresh and dynamic. There are enemies you'll figure out pretty quickly, and enemies you'll hate with a burning passion, and they're all generally mixed into big groups together as the game progresses. Best amongst these enemies are the bosses. Streets of Rage 4 has a deep roster of varied boss fights, each one requiring some different strategies. They're some of my favourite moments from the game. It's really satisfying to figure out how to deal with a boss and learn how to dodge their attacks while landing your own. These extravagant encounters do a pretty good job of teaching you about the importance of patience and waiting for your opportunities to strike. This is a game that is far superior when played with a friend versus playing solo. While solo play isn't bad by any stretch of the imagination and can force you to learn the combat mechanics faster, playing through these levels with a friend in 2-player online co-op or 4-player local co-op is an absolute blast. Whether you're marvelling at the absurdity of the game's world and story, fighting your way through waves and waves of bad guys, or apologising profusely for accidentally drop-kicking your partner out of an elevator, Streets of Rage 4 is a great time with a friend or 3. Streets of Rage 4 is a great update to a classic franchise that almost felt like it was lost to time. And as someone who never really got into the original games on Sega Mega Drive all those decades ago, the biggest compliment I can give to the game is that it won me over, thanks to its slick, meticulous core fighting mechanics, excellent co-op multiplayer, great boss battles, banging soundtrack, and beautiful art style. If you're looking for a multiplayer game to help you cope with social distancing, Streets of Rage 4 might just be the game for you. Thanks very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it or found it useful, consider sticking around here at Words About Games. Our content includes review impressions of games big and small, a weekly podcast dedicated to discussing the happenings in and around the games industry, weekly opinion videos, reactions, debate-driven top 5 and top 10 lists, a regular Hall of Fame series where we discuss our favourite games, and indie game spotlights. We also stream every Friday and Saturday at twitch.tv/wordsaboutgames. Most importantly, have a brilliant day.